Who's shaping your child's education? And is education shifting back into the hands of parents? Earlier, I spoke with Republican Tennessee Congressman Andy Ogles, as well as actress and radio show host and film producer Sam Sorbo, and as well as founder of FreedomTalk, Kelly Walker.
Congressman Ogles, we'll start with you. Thank you so much for joining us here. In September 2021, the National School Board Association sent a letter to the Department of Justice, to Merrick Garland and President Biden, which labeled parents as potential domestic terrorists. This isn't a talking point. This is actually real life. What have whistleblowers revealed about the situation and the DOJ's involvement and investigations?
I mean, what we saw under the Biden administration was a systematic weaponization of the government against the people. So if you were concerned about your children, then they were concerned about you, they being the government. And so suddenly, by being an active parent, an engaged parent, you were a threat to this bureaucracy that was really indoctrinating our children. And so if you're willing to push back, fight against the system, row against the current, then they labeled you as some sort of terrorist. But not just in that vein, but we saw it with faith, and we saw it with, just go down the list, political positions, et cetera. And so it's important that we have these stories come forward, that whistleblowers come forward, and then ultimately that we have a series of investigations into the Justice Department and how they labeled and targeted individuals for their religious or their personal beliefs.
Is there any concern right now that some of these things could still be active in states that aren't affected by the federal government?
Yes. I mean, anytime, I ran for government because I don't trust the government. I ran for office because I don't trust the government, right? I want D.C. out of Tennessee. But at the end of the day, I think we have a president who has a vision for our country to get back to the Constitution. We have lawmakers such as myself that are willing to fight and defend and be outspoken, quite frankly. I've been targeted because of it, but willing to defend and stand up for the Constitution. So as long as you have a group of patriots who are willing to fight, go back to our founding fathers. It was a small group of individuals that had a dream and a vision for this country, and it led to the creation of the greatest country in the world. I still believe in that vision, and I'm willing to fight for it.
Sam, thank you for joining us here. Tell us about your background and how you were actually canceled by Hollywood, and what ultimately led you to step away from Hollywood and taking that step away, and what ultimately opened your eyes to how education was being shaped.
I started home educating my children and discovered that there are severe issues with our system of schooling. I no longer call it a system of education because they fail to educate. And I'm not sure why we are sort of beating that drum when we see that they are failing our children. And then, of course, my husband was deeply involved in Hollywood, and then he was very outspoken, and Hollywood took a direction. But speaking to what Merrick Garland did, he set a tone with that letter. He set a tone, and he enabled people to target parents. And there's nothing in the books that has undone that yet. So they are still, the people who wish to target parents are still targeting parents. I think part of Kelly's story is that some of the people who were arresting him, he knew they didn't want to arrest him, but they were following the rules. But there are plenty of people who want to arrest parents and want to hassle parents simply for standing up for their children, simply for pushing back against a school system that seeks to indoctrinate their children and abuse them. And I view a lot of the viewpoints that are in our public schools today, such as gender transition, as child abuse. When you are teaching a second grader about lubrication and same-sex attraction, which they are, that's child abuse.
And for speaking out and saying such things previously, you would be labeled a domestic terrorist.
Yes, but I don't listen to them. Absolutely. But my kids were already out of the schools. So my son actually spoke at a school board meeting ages ago when this was sort of first coming down the pipe. But yes, that's exactly what they're doing. And then you have to think, why are they doing that? Why do they seek to control the children away from their parents? Why would, we used to have, it was sort of a grand bargain. You get my children to educate, but we're sort of in partnership in order to raise up the children and educate them. That's not the case anymore. They're not interested in working with parents. That much is obvious. And then you have to ask why. Is it trafficking? What are they really interested in if they want the parents to be out of the picture?
Kelly, thank you for joining us. You have firsthand experience with this. Tell us about your story and how this all played out for you.
Unfortunately, I do, not only as a parent and having my children affected by this, but at the time in 2021, we had a community coffee shop, and we became sort of the hub for people to come talk about these issues and what they were enduring and what they were suffering. So we had parents coming to us saying, Kelly, our kids are committing suicide. My son gets migraines every time he's forced to wear a mask. We had a young man in our neighborhood go out in the desert and shoot himself in the head, and we found out later he did this as the police were coming, and he said, I'm never going back. And it turns out that he was living in an abusive household, and when the schools closed, he had nowhere to go. I wrote about this as a professional because at the time I was editor-in-chief for a national medical publication. So I had this duty and responsibility, I felt, to speak out for these people because they had no one to speak out for them. So we organized in our coffee shop, April 26th of 2021, the day before a school board meeting was coming, and a whole lot of parents showed up. We were packed wall to wall. And all the parents and kids wanted to do was say, look, these COVID policies, there's no common sense to them. They're driving our kids to mental health issues. Even by that time, and it's certainly apparent now, but even by that time, the statistics were showing that these policies were increasing the youth suicide rates. We had Freedom Talk episodes where we'd bring people in and they got to tell their story. And we had a young man come in who had been put on suicide watch because of the ostracism and the isolation that he felt. And he got to speak his piece, tell the community, and it changed him. And I think it could have been a part of saving his life. So because I was outspoken, because I was allowing people to have a voice, the county, the school district, the Vail School District went after me hard. And the three of us dads ended up sitting in an office meeting on behalf of one dad whose son was forced to wear a mask. He threw it in the nurse's trash. They made him pick the dirty mask up out of the trash. And we sat in an office meeting, and that was portrayed as if we tried to attack the principal. It was nothing of the sort. And among the three dads, I arguably did the least amount. I sat and talked. I got sentenced to 100 days in jail and over $10,000 in fines. The other two dads, unsupervised probation and small, maybe $250 fines. So it really was targeting those who spoke out. And I became...
Because you had the coffee shop that was the hub.
It was trying to intimidate me.
Was this a partisan issue for you ever?
No, it really wasn't. For me, it was just about parents and children and what are the policies doing, how are they affecting kids. And I wrote a lot about the collateral damage and how unacceptable it was. And I wrote about things like from peer-reviewed articles about how these kids no longer could go to the doctor or the dentist or the teacher. So the signs of abuse on children, on women, sometimes men who are abused, they're isolated. I had people come to me and say, I'm deaf or I'm hearing impaired, and now I can't read lips and my world's completely silent. I had somebody come and say, my teenage son is autistic and he freaks out, he can't handle wearing a mask, and somebody threatened to kill him and his son because his son wasn't wearing a mask. I mean, this whole thing was so out of control, and because we spoke out, because we relayed these messages, we were targeted because they wanted to shut us up.
Congressman, we'll go back to you. How do we ensure that this kind of targeting doesn't occur again to parents, and what guardrails do you think can be put in place?
You really have to go back to COVID itself and how it was weaponized against the American people. And what I mean by that, so I was county executive at the time in Tennessee. We have 95 counties. And in Tennessee, the county executives or county mayors, the terms are used interchangeably. We had most of the authority, and I refused to comply. I simply looked at the state constitution, Article 1, Section 7, and then 58-2-107, which is the Emergency Powers Act. And it actually, in some regards, empowers you, but in other ways restricts what you can and can't do in a state of emergency. And I always defaulted back to the law. And I used the law itself to defend the people of Murray County. And of the 95 counties, only 2022 decided to do any sort of mandates, masks, shots, etc. Meanwhile, I kept my community open, and most of the state followed my lead simply because it was nonsense. And when you look, I never had to debate the efficacy of the shot or the efficacy of masks, etc. I simply fell back to the law. So it matters who leads at the local level, because at the end of the day, it was a county executive who led the charge to say enough is enough. Look, if you want to wear a mask, you're a big boy, go wear a mask. I, however, am not. and you can't do a darn thing about it. Why? Because I have laws to protect me. And so I think it's important to peacefully have a voice, to make sure that you're heard. But again, you get back to President Trump. When we have a Justice Department, you have scores of individuals who are retiring or quitting because it's no longer woke and weaponized. And so there's more work to be done, but I think we're on the right and correct path. But again, it's important who leads at the local level. So anyone who aspires to politics, one, I'll try to talk you out of it. But that being said, we need good people running for school board, for county commission, for the alderman seats, for those mayoral seats, because when the rubber hits the road, when they come for your liberty, they start local.
Sam, with regard to what is happening in the education system, you've spoken at length about how certain ideas are quietly making their way in. How are parents supposed to recognize what's actually being taught, and what should they do about it?
I have an initiative to put parents on school boards and get rid of people who aren't parents on school boards, because parents should be more integrally involved in the education of their children. And so that's one step that we could take. The other step is for parents to ask questions, but what they find often is they don't get the answers. They're put off, they're delayed, they refuse to answer. One woman I just heard had to issue a FOIA to get the information, and what she discovered was they were harvesting data on her daughter using one of the apps, one of the many platforms that they use to track education. It's AI, and so it's accustomed to the child, and it can do great things for the child, but at the same time, it's taking all this data. And when she finally got the results, she got everybody else's results also. I think parents really need to be more involved, and I think what happened was we had a school system that has been, over the past several decades, telling parents, you don't worry about it. Back away, we'll take it from here, we'll take care of everything. And now they've gotten sort of a little bit big for their britches, and so they're saying, you really are not needed and we don't want you around. And nothing could be further from the truth. Do you know the number one predictor for academic success for a child is parental involvement? So there's absolutely no reason, they have no reason to keep the parents away from the schooling of their children, except for nefarious reasons.
Kelly, you've been on the front lines, obviously, speaking out about this on behalf of parents. As a father, you've been driven to do this. What kinds of concerns do families bring forward when you're out there talking to folks?
I have a criminal record now, even though I did nothing wrong. And I maintain that the people who prosecuted me are the criminals. I know a mom who's, I have no criminal record before this. I know a mother who's a children's book author, school mom. She was sent to jail, county jail, for 5 days to quote unquote teach her a lesson. And then they tried to force her, compel speech, to write a letter of apology for standing up for her child. She refused to do it, so now she has a warrant out for her arrest. For the people whose lives were destroyed, who were attacked relentlessly for years, this is still very much alive. They took our home, they took everything from us, my reputation, online. I have don't search my name. I have some very good press too, but this is where we need to say that these parents were deprived of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness simply because they cared about their children. And so they need restitution. We need President Trump to go in. We need an executive order. We need to make this right for these parents because they didn't deserve what happened to them. It's not a crime, and I think Andy said this at one point, it's not a crime to be concerned about your children. And we know this was fraudulent because 14 state attorneys general came forward and said the memo, the letter from the NSBA, was a massive fraud against the American people. So what I'm concerned about right now is that this will be swept under the rug, forgotten. These people we're starting over as a family. I'm 55 years old and we're starting over financially. That's a hard row to hoe. And my concern is that they'll be forgotten.
Congressman, we'll give you the last word.
The victory of President Trump and the resetting of some of that deep state, it's real. It works against members like myself who are conservative, who are fighting for family values. Look, I'm not perfect, but at the same token, I'm outspoken and you know where I stand. And so for those individuals that were targeted by school systems, I think there's the opportunity here, as was said, to go in case by case and try to right wrongs that have been done. At the end of the day, we want to empower parents to take a stand, to defend their children, and not look over the shoulder waiting for the deep state to come and get them.
Really appreciate all of you sitting down to share the story. Thank you.
Thank you.